Hi there and welcome back. Thanksgiving is finally here, and this is our last sermon in our series on gratitude. And the more we've talked about gratitude, the more we realize it does take intentionality. We have so much that we don't even think to thank God for most of it or any of it sometimes. Pastor Bob Russell, in his book, Jesus, Lord of Your Personality, he points out this problem. He says that having a lot doesn't tend to produce a grateful spirit. Here are his words. Have you had a taste of the best that this world has to offer? Maybe you went to Hawaii once on a vacation, so now it's harder for you to enjoy the state park. You've eaten a steak at Ruth Chris, so it's harder to be thankful for a meal at Ponderosa. You've driven a Jaguar, so now you can't be as content with your used Chevrolet. You've cheered for a national champion, so now it's difficult to be grateful when your team has a good season but doesn't take home the title. Generally speaking, the more we have, the less grateful we are. And I think all of us are guilty of this at some point in our lives and in some way. A very wise man named King Solomon lifted a prayer to God about this very problem. In Proverbs 30, 7 through 9, he records, "Give me neither poverty nor riches. Give me just enough to satisfy my needs. For if I grow rich, I may deny you and say, 'Who's the Lord?' And if I am poor, I may steal and thus insult God's holy name." Now, living in a state of gratitude doesn't mean that we go around with a goofy smile on our face all the time. We aren't to be insensitive to other people's troubles and feelings, being Pollyanna in their pain. We can be grateful and thankful without being irrationally happy in bad situations. In the movie Heathers, Winona Ryder has a character that is very cynical, and she says, if you were happy every day of your life, you wouldn't be a human being. You'd be a game show host. And nevertheless, the Bible teaches that Thanksgiving is intended to be a lifestyle, not just a holiday once a year, but something we live out as an expression of who we are. And who we are as Christians means we strive to live as the Bible commands. Now today we're turning to the Gospel of Luke for our teaching on the importance of gratitude. Luke's telling of this story is not so much a story to demonstrate Jesus' divine power, although it does do that. It's instead a lesson, though, on the important attitude that should characterize a disciple of Jesus Christ. And yet in today's lesson, not everybody gets this idea. Only 1 in 10 actually do. Now, this incident is only given to us in the Gospel of Luke, and Luke includes it because it expresses themes that Luke stressed throughout his Gospel. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem for the very last time, where he will be treated horribly and killed. And even with this on his mind, Jesus has mercy on outcasts and those rejected by society. So we're reading today from Luke 17, 11 through 19. On his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise except this foreigner?" And then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." Now, Luke gives us a geographical location of this event because of the significance of its account. He tells us that it's on the border between Samaria and Galilee, and Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. Now, Jews who wanted to travel south to Judea and Jerusalem would avoid traveling through Samaria. So many traveled along the border, and this incident happened along this way. And this accounts for the fact that there is a Samaritan as one of the lepers in the group with 9 other Jews. Their disease made them a community all on their own, and their geographic location no longer became necessary. Now they stood at a distance, Luke says, because they were unclean, allowed to approach or go near clean people because they were contagious. So much was unknown about the diseases back then that out of caution, people were just isolated and ostracized. Now the lepers call out to Jesus and they address him as Master. And by calling him Master, they're acknowledging some awareness of Jesus and his power. Jesus has been teaching and preaching for 3 years now, so they have heard what he's done. They've heard of him, they know what he can do, but that's really the extent of their devotion to him. They don't call themselves followers, clearly. But they call out to Jesus as a last-ditch effort to get help and healing. What could it possibly hurt, right? And Jesus gives these lepers a directive to go and show themselves to the priests. Now, those who were sick probably expected Jesus to lay hands on them and pray. But Jesus' command implies that by the time they get to the priests, they will be healed. The priestly examination would allow them then access back into society and their families. Now, as 9 of the lepers headed off to find the priests, one of them goes directly to Jesus. And he praises Jesus in a loud voice, giving him credit for this miracle. His gratitude is great, and it overtakes him, and he needs to thank Jesus for what he has done and what this means to his life. He throws himself at Jesus' feet and profusely thanked him for this new gift of life. Because this is what it is. This is a ticket back into life from exile. And he was a Samaritan. I love how Luke just lets that hang out there for a second. Why does he do that? Because it sets the stage for the lesson that Jesus is about to teach. As this man lays prostrate on the ground, giving thanks, Jesus has a question. Where are the other 9 lepers? Is only this one truly grateful for the healing they received? And again, this is Luke's attempt to show us that the Jews who knew of the Messiah just didn't get it. They should have recognized Jesus and returned to express their gratitude as well. But their response is typical of the Jews in Jesus' day. They took blessings, but they didn't respond. And then Jesus gives this man another gift, a bigger gift, a better gift, salvation. This man had faith and belief that Jesus made his healing happen. So he must be more than a man. And it was this faith that made the man truly well, not just physically, but spiritually. And being spiritually healed meant he was assured a place in eternity with Jesus. Now Luke is clear in this telling that all 10 lepers had some level of faith. When they saw Jesus, they all thought collectively that he could help them. And they all obeyed Jesus after they were given grace and healed and told to go to the priests. Now we know what happened to the one, but think about what happened to the other 9. On their way to the priest, their skin began to heal, and they were becoming clean. And this is exactly what they asked for. This is what they wanted. And this is exactly what they got. Once they arrived at the priest, they probably got their clean bill of health and rejoined society. And what Jesus did for them allowed them to live a normal life again. But this was the end of their gift. This was the end of the grace they received. Don't you think Jesus would have loved to have welcomed all 10 lepers into eternity with him? Jesus wants to do immensely more for us than cure our physical ails. He wants to heal us in ways that will last forever. He wants to give us a relationship with him that will give us much more than just a normal life. Apparently, 9 out of the 10 lepers were willing to settle for just a normal life rather than eternity. And those men who went off were interested only in this life and the comforts and pleasures and things that they could tangibly touch and see. Now, their physical cure was miraculous, and it was very good, but it was not as good as it could be. We want to be one of the people out of the 10 who get the better gift. Only 1 out of the 10 men did not stop at the physical change Jesus offered. He went deeper into the grace of his healing and found gratitude so profound that he acted. And I'm sure it motivated and changed his behavior from that moment on. Christians are simply to live in a state of gratitude, responding to life as a gift. The Samaritan returned to the one who blessed him, and he gave thanks. And God, having given him so much already, is moved by his gratitude, and he gives him salvation because of his faith. The others missed the chance to respond to God's grace in that moment. They responded to his commands, and they received what they hoped for, what they asked for, but they merely received the grace. They did not respond to that grace. They did not seize the opportunity to go beyond obeying Jesus to thank him personally. And this is another example of what we have been looking at for the past 3 weeks about grace. The lepers all received grace directly and only from God above and his power to heal. And only one of them responded in that moment to the grace that they received with gratitude. Now, they may have gone on to live lives of service and gratitude, but that's not Luke's point here. In the moment, confronted by the grace of God, gratitude was not their gut instinct or their response. Luke's point is that it's not enough to give a passing thanks. One must stop and offer thanks and live that kind of thanks out in their lives. Max Lucado talks about a time he was living as an American in Brazil. And one day he was walking along the street and he felt a tug on his pant leg. Turning around, he saw a little boy who was about 5 or 6 years old with dark, beady eyes and a dirty little face. And the little boy looked up at Max and said, "Bread, please." Now, there are always little beggar boys on the streets of Brazil, Max said. So usually he just turns away from them because there's so many, you can't feed them all. But there was something so compelling about this little boy that he said he couldn't turn away. So he took the little boy's hand and said, "Come on, come with me." And they took him into a coffee shop and ordered. He said, "I'll have a cup of coffee and give the boy a piece of pastry, whatever he wants." Now, the coffee counter was set up so that the coffee was down at the other end of the store. So Max says he walked on down to the other end to get his cup of coffee, forgetting about the little boy because beggar boys usually just got their bread and took off, disappeared. But this one didn't. After he got his pastry, he came over to Max and he just stood there. Well, Max could feel his little eyes again staring at him, and so he turned and looked. The little boy was holding his pastry, and he looked up at Max and he said, "Thank you, sir. Thank you very much." Max said, "I was so touched by the boy's thanks that I would have bought him the whole store." He said, "I sat there for another 30 minutes thinking about a little boy who came back and said, 'Thank you.'" This young boy had gratitude, and it was expressed. And if we have this gratitude, it should show. We will be praising God. We will have joy in our hearts. Now, Jesus equated gratitude with faith, the awareness that all comes from God, no matter the gift. And God is gracious with what he gives. And if we have gratitude in our hearts, then we will share in his quality of life. 9 of the 10 lepers obeyed the law Jesus gave them. He told them to go show themselves to the priest, but the gift did not penetrate into the purpose for which he gave it. Only 1 out of 10 got the point and returned to give thanks, and only 1 out of 10 got the very best gift that day. What did he do with that gift? We can only know. Wonder. What did he do with that gift? We can only wonder. But we know he was grateful.